and welcome to another episode of Tory Talks. I'm Sam. This is...
Yeah, hi, I'm Ian. Pleased to see you again.
It's been such a long time. And this is episode 19. So we're getting through them.
And I just want to clarify, okay, that I shall probably be chewing during this episode as well. I'm a bit of an American hard gum addict, you see, and this is the only thing that gets me through some very long and arduous council meetings. That's all I will say. I've always got a coffee and some sweets. That's me all over.
And that is so, I owe you an apology because I put out a clip of what we were discussing before we actually, because as soon as we get into these, I then just record, because sometimes we have a chat and the chat is better than the actual podcast. So I put a clip out and you were picking your nails and a few people have commented on it, but I put it out without actually asking Ian if it was okay to put it out, because I never noticed, because we're such close friends that I don't notice little annoying habits that you might have, because to me you're perfect, Ian.
Correct. Tick, bing. Oh, and by the way, I have put my phone on silent today. All right.
Oh, good. Yeah, I've just put mine on silent as well. So today we're going to be talking about elections, touching on free school meals and homeschooling. So one of the reasons why we had a bit of a delay on recording is because we were going through selection processes, ready for the May election, and I'm standing for 2 elections.
Yeah, I know. To be fair, I was involved in the selection of her on both of those. So it's all my fault, I'm afraid.
So Ian's going to be my running mate on the borough, and I'm very excited about that.
Yep. Yeah, you'll make a good borough councillor, that's for sure.
Thank you. And then we've got the county as well, but we were doing a lot of prep, weren't we? And then of course there's some uncertainty about what's going on. So this year we're supposed to be having the delayed borough elections. I'm standing in a by-election, and then we've got the county elections and the police and crime commissioner elections as well. So we've got a busy year. And now we're not sure what's going to happen. We can't campaign. Labour and Conservatives have both agreed that they're not going to be sending out leaflets, though it was in the paper today, or in an article today, that the Liberal Democrats have used the excuse of volunteering as they get out of why they're breaking the rules, but technically not breaking the rules, but breaking the spirit of the rules, leafleting, and the Green Party are leafleting as well. So we've down tools, we're not going to leaflet until further notice. Same with Labour, and we're not sure whether the elections are going to take place. So what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, obviously, considering I was supposed to be standing for election myself last May, it was definitely the right thing last year that they were cancelled, because we were right at the beginning of it. None of us really knew anything about it. I believe the lockdown only started right at the end of March, didn't it? So it would have been impossible. I think this year is slightly different. My personal opinion is that elections should be postponed until the autumn. Or maybe postponed and not given a date, because what people don't like is things keep getting put off. And obviously, if you do postpone them and put a date on it, one of the problems you have is then having to stick to that date, and none of us really know what the future is going to hold. So, i.e., I've seen dates. I've seen the following suggestions: postpone them till June, postpone them till July, postpone them till September. The problem with the first two is that we might not be out of this. I mean, we might not be out of it in September, but I don't think it's wise to put a date in there that we're not 100% sure of that we can hit. Now, personally speaking, postponing elections is the last thing any of us probably want to do. From a purely personal Conservative point of view, obviously, our group on the borough last year were probably going to make 4 or 5 big gains last year and get lots of extra counts. We were on the Boris bounce, as it were. Everything was going in our favour, and obviously those elections were cancelled. This time, I think we all know a bit more about it, and for any of you that don't understand the mechanics behind the election, it's not necessarily you guys voting that is the problem. Because obviously we could have all postal vote elections. I'm sure we'll get on to that in a moment as to why that's not necessarily a good idea. But it's not necessarily the actual physical person voting that is the issue. It's the issue that each polling station has to have a polling clerk. Usually they're made up of semi-retired, retired people. They're made up of what you'd class as the COVID target group, as it were. And then you have the count. And the count is usually extremely labour intensive, with 3 or 4 people sitting on a desk close together performing this count, and then representatives, one representative from each of the parties, watching over that to check for any wrongdoings. Now, that's just impossible. It's impossible to social distance it's impossible to social distance running the elections the way we've run them up to this point. So with that in mind, I don't see how holding the elections is a possibility. Just for timescale wise, if I just so everybody knows, is that if the election was due to take place in the first week of May, we go into what's called the restricted period, sometimes known as PERDA, in March. That's where councils and councillors have to be very wary of the kind of literature they put out. Everything has to be costed. You have spending limits. And really, if we were in an election season now, we would be out probably every night of the week, knocking on doors, delivering leaflets, doing various different things around the place. And I don't think that any voter will be able to make an informed, bearing in mind that these are local elections. They should be voted for on local matters, not national policies or national figures. And I think it's very difficult for local people to get and learn who their candidates are if we can't go around and introduce ourselves, whether that be on paper via a leaflet or knocking on their door. So I don't really see there's any other option, although it's the worst, most nuclear option, banning elections. I mean, it's the least democratic thing in the world. What are your thoughts?
I have had the opinion throughout this that any person who supported banning an election or delaying an election was afraid of facing the electorate. So I was concerned that I'd seen standing councillors wanting a delay, because then they're sitting on an expired mandate. However, now that I've given it, because sometimes I see things very black and white. So this is democracy. Other countries have gone through it. You know, let's just get this done and go 100% postal vote if that's what's necessary. But then after properly thinking about it, it feels to me that it's the only possible way to delay. And I'm happy as a candidate to face the electorate at any moment. So if it's not delayed, then I will go in there and I'll do what I can and, you know, and see what the result is. I'm not going to push for it to be delayed, but if it is delayed, I'll understand the reasons why. And it's not because we're denying people their democratic right. It is because it's the safest thing to do. We don't have the ability to get everyone on a postal vote at this late stage. If this was, you know, early last year, and we were saying, look, we're going to delay this by a year and a half, or we're going to delay it by a year in order to put mechanisms in place for 100% postal votes, and this is what the plan is for every party, then fine. But you can't now, at this late stage, put the mechanisms in place where it's going to work. And I have concerns over the fact that we do have on the count, as you've raised, a very open way of doing things that are very different in other countries. We watch that, we watch the piles, we watch the count, we have the ability to say, actually, we want this counted again. If this goes ahead, it might be behind closed doors, and that leaves too many questions about whether it would be truly democratic. Because if it's not open door and open for us to see, then is it really democratic anyway? So there's a lot of concerns over transparency, safety, this kind of thing. It's not something I want. I certainly don't want the elections to be delayed, but we're not that far forward compared to what we were last year. We're back into another lockdown. I just can't see how it can go ahead in a safe and correct way, and in a way that gives everyone an opportunity to vote. So I can't see right now how we could get every single electorate registered and all the postal votes out, and ensure that people A, understand a postal vote, and B, that they can get those back in time. And then, like you say, then you've got the counting issues as well. It's just too many issues. I can't see how the mechanisms will be put in place for it to be fair and proper. And so unfortunately, I concede.
I think as well, it's quite illuminating actually that it's the Liberals and the Greens going out and breaking the rules, as it were, by delivering. But one thing to be very, very careful about, certainly to think about democracy, is that, you know, undoubtedly, if they were to go ahead, we would have to deliver to people via a paid delivery instead of using our delivery networks. Now, that would massively favour the two big parties.
Correct.
Because we've got the money to be able to do it. You know, we could get that sorted. We could deliver to every household, and we could do that with the budget we've got. We could do that, but the smaller parties couldn't, and an independent couldn't. And you have to remember that these are small elections. These are elections for districts, for shire counties, and quite a lot of the candidates are independent of any political party. And it's a big thing, and that's where and certainly in some of the rural areas, you get a lot more independence. And expecting them to be able to foot the bill to post to every one of their constituents is just, it's not fair. And you know, so yeah, it'd be very gung-ho to let's go ahead because we benefit, but that's not the case. I think the important thing to remember is that, because I've seen quite a big clamour that, you can't cancel democracy, we've got to let us have our say. And so this isn't a say. I think one of the problems you'd have as well is that you'd almost turn it into a national election. It wouldn't be an election on COVID. It wouldn't be an election on what the government's done on COVID. It'd be an election on local issues and local matters. And I think one of the real salient points in this is that most of these elections that are due to take place in May have paltry turnouts. I mean, the borough elections in Ipswich, the highest percentage of any ward is usually about 45%. The lowest percentage last time was 17%. The average is about 30%. So that means, more people don't vote than do. The numbers are really low, and I can guarantee that a lot of the people that are moaning about it on social media don't ever go out and vote at local elections anyway. And then the most important factor to me, you've just mentioned about having to bring in a new system. Well, to be brutally honest, it's councils at both levels that are leading the fight against coronavirus. I can tell you now that councils have not got the time or the manpower at the moment to completely change the electoral system just so that we can hold an election. And should we want councils to do that? We want councils to be concentrating on keeping the residents of their council area safe and secure, and spending time concentrating on getting things up and running again. We don't need them to be enacting new systems for elections that could actually quite easily be postponed for a few months. And I think that's a really important point, that councils are under incredible pressure at the moment. I mean, just the grant funding that the government's given out. We are now on our 10th different scheme at Ipswich Borough Council. We've got 10 grant funding schemes now open, because each time there's a different set of lockdowns rules, there's a new grant scheme come out. It's incredibly complicated to dish out this money, and obviously our aim is to dish out the money from the government to the businesses as soon as we possibly can. We don't want to have to dissipate that to have some council employees working on 100% postal votes. We just haven't got the time. The time is not there. And by far and away, the most sensible option, this is coming from I lead the council group at Ipswich. We would have gained seats last year. We would probably gain seats this year. So I'm not doing this because I'm not saying it because we're in sort of losing. We're in opposition. We want to control the council. We've got no chance of doing it if there aren't the elections, but we shouldn't be having them. It's as simple as that. They shouldn't. And my biggest concern about all of this is certainty. So all group leaders across all political parties have urged the government to give some kind of certainty on this. Are we or aren't we? Don't leave it till March or April to tell us we are. You need to tell us now. And we need the certainty now. So all I will urge the minister in charge, which will be Robert Jenrick, to do is to make a decision and make it within the next week or two, because that's the only way forward out of this. Give everybody a bit of certainty.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree, because, I can understand the pandemic is a ever-growing thing and things change day by day. But when it comes to advance notice and certainty, we certainly aren't getting that. And that leads on to what else we're going to talk about, and that is children and schools, because we were assured up until a day that the kids went back to school that the kids were going back to school, and then all us parents found out at 8 p.m. on a Monday, by the way, you're homeschooling again. And the teachers were given no notice, and now we're in full lockdown with kids that are remote learning again, and we had no notice. We could have been told during the holidays, by the way, prepare yourself, but no. So
can I just say, can I just butt in? I don't usually like to butt in, but you used a word and I had to get in there while you said it. You used the term remote learning, and throughout this pandemic I've noticed something quite worrying to me, and I think there is a massive disparity here. So the difference between private schools and mainstream education in their homeschooling is immense. And it's the wording that they use, I think, just describes it. A mainstream state-run school will call it homeschooling.
Yeah.
Whereas all private schools call it remote learning, because private schools have made every single effort to replicate classroom learning at home, so they're calling it remote learning. Whereas mainstream schools some have been better than others, but some have been incredibly poor and that's why they call it homeschooling, because they expect the people at their home to do the majority of the work. I mean, it's funny because there was somebody on Radio Suffolk on my way home today talking about, and I won't mention the primary school in Ipswich, but they were actually praising them, saying how good they'd been throughout this second lockdown, because my children are getting 2 to 3 hours a day of learning. And I'm thinking, well, that's less than half what they should be getting. Why are you saying that that's good? It makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Well, yeah, I mean, I purposely used the term remote learning because of your comment, because I've been saying homeschooling, and then you're like, and your comment last time we spoke. So I purposely used remote learning just so the listeners know my children don't go to private. They go to school up the road.
And I don't have children. Can I just add there now? I've never had a positive reaction to teaching. I think the standard of teaching in our country has dropped considerably over the past couple of decades. I don't really know why, but in my opinion, it has. Now, okay, the government could have made an earlier decision. That's without a shadow of a doubt. Why they messed around and, you know, closed schools on day one of the term is God only knows. But there isn't a sensible person out there that didn't think that at some time in January, February, March, April, May, schools were going to close again. And the really, really, really disappointing thing for me is that we didn't use the time in between when schools closed last time and when schools closed this time to increase the, or just to improve the learning experience for children. It was almost as though, 2 or 3 days into this current school closure, the BBC announced that, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Now, that should have been from day one. Everybody, if there's a head teacher out there that didn't think that we were going to have school closures at some point in January, February and March, then they probably don't deserve to be a head teacher. And I'm going to sound harsh because everybody else always praises. It's a bit like the NHS. All you ever hear from anybody is praise. But realistically, if this was a private business and we, and that's exactly why private schools do it totally differently. If you go to a private school, you're getting 6 or 7 hours tuition a day, but you're not getting it with state-run schools. And that is awful. Because you have to remember that in a few years' time, these pupils are going to be battling against each other for jobs. And one set of pupils is going to be highly disadvantaged because of the lack of schooling that they've had. Now, I know how tough it must be, okay? But, my brother works IT manager at a private school, and he told me how quick they were during the first school closures to get things online. And it's possible. He even did an educational. He was asked by some of the big tech companies. There was him and a few other employees from schools where they did like an instructional video on how to do this and using Google Hangouts, use this, that, and something else. And I just think that, and it's not all blaming on schools either. The fact that the government is still, it's amazing that the government has given out approaching 2 million laptops or devices for children to use. But why are they still giving them out?
Well, sorry, go on, carry on.
They should have been given to the schools months ago. I don't know when the schools first closed. I can't remember. I don't have children. When did they first close during the first lockdown?
They closed straight away, didn't they? So the first lockdown,
okay,
and
so
then
they were closed in March.
March, yeah.
So, and realistically, it was probably September time where we knew we were going to get a second, a second wave, as it were.
Yeah, and the kids only went back in September, didn't they? So, some of the children were given an option to go back earlier, and then all kids went back in September, and that's my frustration. So I just want to say that our school was prepared. So they knew that we were going to go onto online learning and they had prepared it ready. So as soon as it was announced, we then got a video on this class dojo thing, video from the head to say, right, okay, this is the plan. Give us, I don't know, an hour in the morning, but you will be online and you will be learning on the Tuesday. And we did, and they've done the Zooms every single day. They've adjusted it the following week because they've learned from some of the mistakes, because the kids were having too many hours on the screen. So now they're doing the screen lessons in the morning, then in the afternoon they're just going to tell you what the activity is, and it's going to be a project to do in the afternoon, and then they're going to do they call it intervention groups, so little groups for the children that might need a top up. So the school has been incredible, but they put out a video to say, look, we've got a limited amount of laptops we use in the classroom. We're going to be giving those out to some of the pupils, but the government is prioritising high schools. So right now, they can't get any government laptops. And so, but I'm thinking, yeah, we're so far into this. Why haven't the children
that have been struggling got those laptops.
I mean, one thing to consider, and I only know this because I myself has been in the market for a couple of electrical goods, is that one thing to consider is that they just might not have been out there. I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, when we went online meetings at the council, my first online meeting, my bloody webcam stopped working. I couldn't get a decent webcam until November. So my webcam stopped working in early April. And I couldn't get another one, a decent one, not a $12.99 one. I couldn't get a decent webcam till November because they were sold out everywhere, because everybody around the world, not just in this country, everybody around the world was all of a sudden using Zoom. And you have to consider that we've gone from 0 to 100, to use that analogy, in a short period of time. And there is that to consider. But that's where the communication comes in. If somebody from the government comes out and says, we'd have loved, oh, my phone's going
you
off.
Lie.
I thought it was on silent. I thought it was on silent, but I realised what I meant is I'll put this, I do this on a phone rather than on a webcam because it's just easier. And I thought that was on silent. But to be honest, this is where the communication is coming a little bit, because if the government had come out and said, look, it's our intention to give everybody who needs one a device. We can't do it. There's a worldwide shortage of devices. We're not getting any until this date. At least you have something to focus on and to look forward to, or to work towards. But it's been that lack of engagement that has made it into a bit of a, well, it's made it as a political own goal, because you're just allowing people. I mean, to be fair to them, they've given out an astonishingly huge number of devices, okay? And they should be applauded for it. But they're not being applauded for it because the stupid way it's been communicated, and they're almost allowing themselves to be attacked, even though they've done the right thing.
Yeah, and I agree. And actually, so I wanted to get my son a laptop for Christmas, and I ended up getting, searching for a good month or so, and then getting the last one. So they came in stock. I got the last one locally, and I paid 150 quid more than what it was 2 months prior, and it's a terrible quality. But I went into a shop and said, look, this is what I need it for, and they said, you are not going to get a laptop less than £600 for the next 6 months. And I thought, I'm not spending 600 quid on a laptop. I'll have to just work it out and use they've got a little £35 Kindle thing that we've managed to sort of make do with. I can't justify that cost for an 8-year-old.
Yeah, well, what you've got to bear in mind is, we had the same thing at work when last year when we were trying to send people to homeschool, and getting hold of laptops was impossible. But weirdly enough, and there must have been some kind of priority level, and that is what I find so much has been kept secret. Obviously, at the council, they had a lot of home working in place way before the pandemic anyway. But I think there's about an extra 450 people all of a sudden were working from home, who were employed by the council. All managed to get laptops. Probably only took about 3 or 4 weeks. So my guess is that there was some kind of priority, because in all honesty, it was far more important that business was allowed access to the laptops before education. On a simple economic point of view, that the whole system would have, were the councils not able to get hold of hundreds of laptops, you have to remember, I know it seems a bit banal, but your bins wouldn't have been able to be collected. Your council tax wouldn't have been able to be collected. The council tax is not collected. The council is not going to be able to provide any services. The system collapses around you. So although there'll be plenty of people shouting at the screen and arguing that, oh, school's more important, you might think it is, but actually the infrastructure of the country is far more important than education. That might seem to be awful to those people who are in education at the moment, but the whole system would have collapsed had we have not had some kind of priority thing. Now, that message hasn't been got across the population. So my biggest thing about all to do with homeschooling is the messaging that goes across with it. And if the messaging was better, I think that people would be more understanding, and there would be less pressure on the government, because the long and short of it is delivering the best part of 2 million devices is absolutely superb. But because they've done it badly, they're getting bad reputation for it.
Yeah, I agree. But that's the whole feel about, so very quickly, and then we'll close off, is like, take the free school meals situation. It could have been handled a lot better. We've both discussed at large how we feel about the principle of free school meals anyway, so we won't do that. But there was an adjustment. There was food parcels that were sent out. There was a company that let families down on a couple of occasions. The photos I've received from families in Ipswich and what they've received in their free school meals is more than ample for lunch. It's a variety, and the families that have received it are very grateful for it. And the reason they've sent it to me is because they felt that there was an unjustifiable criticism going out right now. But of course, one or two things that happen that have been a mistake snowballs. But what I predict is going to happen is that now that there's been 2 pictures, one of which is a bit dubious on dates, of families that were let down by a company, there's going to be a U-turn and they're going to get money instead. And that's not going to ensure that children are fed, are they?
Yeah, well,
and that's the communication issue. That is the communication. Instead of communicating properly, as a government should, they panic because it might look bad and U-turn.
There is one. The only thing I'd say in the government's defence on that one is that it was almost impossible to communicate it. So obviously, Tuesday, I think it was, all of a sudden on social media, pictures were being shared of these horrendously bad food parcels. Okay, but they were being shared with horrendously bad misinformation, and it was a deliberate, targeted, planned attack on the government. Mm-hmm. Loads of Labour politicians and political commentators were tweeting out that this isn't £30 worth of parcels, when they knew full well it wasn't meant to be £30. It was meant to be £10.50 and then rising to £15. And they knew that, but they will tweet out the lies. I mean, the parcels were bad enough for £15 or £10.50. But when you told people that they were meant to be £30, of course, the uproar is even more. Now, nobody from any of the big media organisations were interested in having a balanced report. Hence why the photo that you shared on social media of what people in Ipswich are getting, which is an amazing amount, and has been shared very widely on social media and commented on. Of course, they won't pick up on that because it doesn't make a story. I mean, at the end of the day, I think I read somewhere that there's upwards of 2 million of these parcels going out every week. Now, 2 million of anything, you know this, when we do paid delivery for elections and we're delivering 25,000 leaflets, that maybe a couple of hundred go wrong.
Yeah.
2 million food parcels, some aren't going to be as good as the others because there's a problem, there's an issue, there's a whatever. And I think it just needed a little bit. But then what you have to remember is that the media aren't interested. Boring stories don't make the headlines. They call it clickbait for a reason. All these media organisations want to cause outrage, want to cause it. But the good thing that's come out of it is that I think there were 1 or 2 companies that had got contracts that probably were trying to cut corners, and now they've been found out. And now the people realise this wasn't the government's fault. The government didn't tell these people what to put in the parcel. There's the list of the government supplied the money. There was a list of approved items that they could have gone in there. They didn't go round. Somebody from the government didn't go around and check every parcel, did they?
But do people realise that? Because we've got.
They don't.
Yeah, we've got.
They don't. No.
Yeah, and that's because we've got local politicians. Even our local media posted a picture of that, saying this is the standards that people are getting. They weren't interested in what people in this town are receiving. They weren't interested in any information. And so, people are saying, oh, this £30 for a family. These aren't supposed to feed a family. They're supposed to feed that individual child for a week. And that's the thing. People don't know that. People don't know that that's what it's for.
and really, you know, you have to bear in mind, and I know we've got to wrap up soon, that you mentioned earlier that you think now this is going to create a U-turn and we're going to give people cash again.
Give people more money.
I think if there is a U-turn, we'll go back to the vouchers.
Yeah,
they will never. I can tell
thing.
you now. I can tell you now. Well, it's not the same thing, but I will tell you now that they will never go to cash. Never go to cash. Vouchers. I would be surprised if they went back to vouchers, but part of me thinks, do you know what? Go back to vouchers, because then the next story will be, look what all these people are wasting their vouchers on. But you know, I think my final say on this is, because the next one is that old Marcus, I get somebody else to write my tweets for me, Rashford, has now come out and said that free school meals should be available during the school holidays. Well, there ain't no way that should happen. I'm sorry.
But it did happen last year, because
I know it happened, but there is no way that should happen, because the name is in the title. Free school meal. You get it when you're at school. You don't get it when you're not at school. And I'm sorry, it shouldn't happen. And you have to remember that somebody's paying for this, and that is the taxpayer, as usual, the hard-working taxpayer that's going out and paying for their own kids' meals and working all the hours God gives to be able to do that, shouldn't be funding somebody else's children because they can't be bothered. You know my opinion on it. The level of benefits are enough that nobody in this country should go hungry. But that's a completely different episode altogether, and one we've already had.
So we just wanted to get that little bit off our chest because it was in the media this week. But we've covered quite a lot, and an interesting discussion, I think, on the elections especially. So as ever, thank you. And thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you and good night.